Good morning or afternoon, guys. Today is Thursday, November the 19th, and we are reading chapter 11. Now, as a reminder today, guys, you need to make sure that not only do we read chapter 11 closely, but you complete your text analysis, which is on slide 44 today. And then make sure that you consider some of the questions in the book clubs if you are at home. Just think about those. Obviously, you aren't going to be with your classmates to discuss them, but consider them in regards to your own books and what we've been reading. All right, without further ado, guys, let's go ahead and jump into chapter 11. Now, in today's chapter, I want you to consider what we left off with. Huck has decided he's going to dress up like a girl with the help of Jim and go into town because we've determined that he wants to figure out a little something about what's been said in town, perhaps about him, perhaps about Jim. Just can't settle. He needs a little adventure. "Come in," says the woman, and I did. She says, "Take a cheer." I done it. She looked at me all over with her shiny eyes and says, "What might your name be?" "Sarah Williams." "Whereabouts do you live? In this neighborhood?" "No, in Hookerville, 7 miles below. I've walked all the way, and I'm tired out." "Hungry, too, I reckon. I'll find you something." "No, I ain't hungry. I was so hungry, and I had to stop 2 miles below here at a farm, so I ain't hungry no more. It's what makes me so late. My mother's down sick and out of money and everything, and I come to tell my Uncle Abner more. He lives in the upper end of town, she says, and I ain't ever been here before. Do you know him?" "No, but I don't know everybody yet. I haven't lived here quite 2 weeks. It's a considerable ways to the upper end of town. You better stay here all night. Take off your bonnet." "No," I says. "I'll rest a while, I reckon, and go on. I ain't afeard of the dark." She said she shouldn't let me go by myself, and her husband would be in by and by, and maybe in an hour and a half, and she'd send him along with me. Then she got to talking about her husband and about her relations up the river and her relations down the river and about how much better off they used to was and how they didn't know but had made a mistake coming to our town instead of letting well alone. And so on, until it was afeared I had made a mistake coming to find out she was going into the town. But by and by she dropped out onto Pap and the murder, and then I was pretty willing to let her clatter right along. She told about me and Tom Sawyer finding the $6,000, only she got it 10, and all about Pap and what a hard lot he was, and what a hard lot I was. And at last she got down to where I was murdered. I says, "Who done it? We've heard considerable about these things going on in Hookerville, but we don't know 'twas that killed Huck Finn." "Well, I reckon there's a right smart chance of people here that I'd like to know who'd kill him. Some thinks old Finn done it himself." "No! Is that so?" "Most everybody thought it at first. He'll never know how nigh he come to getting lynched. But before they changed around and judged, it was done by a runaway named Jim." "Why, Well, I stopped. I reckon I better keep still. She run on and never noticed I put it in at all. Now, we knew Huck was going to go in here and want to know about himself and what was going on in town and how people thought about him, but now he's found out that the people at first thought that who had killed him? Pap, right? Well, then, after they realized that Jim had run off, they figured that Jim had killed Huck Finn. Now, as good readers, we're making predictions about how this is going to impact the plot later. Let's continue to read. "The runoff the very night Huck Finn was killed. So there's a reward out for him, $300. And there's a reward out for old Finn, too, $200. You see, he come to town the morning after the murder and told about it, and was out with them on the ferry boat hunt. And right away after he up and left. Before night they wanted to lynch him, but he was gone, you see. Well, next day they found out was gone. Found out that he hadn't been since 10 o'clock the night the murder was done. So they done put it on him, you see. And while they were full of it next day, back comes old Finn and went boo-hooing to Judge Thatcher to get money to hunt for the all over Illinois with. Well, the judge give him some, and that evening he got drunk and was around till after midnight with a couple of mighty hard-looking strangers, and then went off with them. Well, he ain't come back since, and they ain't looking for him back till this thing blows over a little, for people thinks now that he killed his boy and fixed things so folks would think robbers had done it. And then he'd get Huck's money without having to bother a long time with a lawsuit. People do say he warn't too good weren't any too good to do it. Oh, he's sly, I reckon. If you don't come back for a year, he'll be all right. You can't prove anything on him, you know. Everything will be quieted down then, and he'll walk into Huck's money as easy as nothing. Yes, I reckon so. I don't see nothing in the way of it. Has everybody quit thinking that the had done it? Oh no, not everybody. A good many thinks he done it, but they'll get the pretty soon now, and maybe they can scare it out of him. Why? Are they after him yet? Well, you're innocent, ain't you? Does $300 lay around every day for people to pick up? Some folks think the ain't far from here. I'm one of them, but I ain't talked it around. A few days ago, I was talking with an old couple that lives next door in the log shanty, and they happened to say hardly anybody ever goes to that island over yonder that's called Jackson's Island. Don't anybody live there? Says I. No, nobody, says they. I didn't say any more, but I done thinking. It was pretty near certain I'd seen smoke over there, and about about the head of the island a day or two before that. So I says to myself, like as not that hiding over there. Anyway, says I, it's worth the trouble giving that place a hunt. I ain't seen any smoke since, so I reckon maybe he's gone, if it was him. My husband's going over there to see, him and another man. He was gone up the river, but he got back today, and I told him as soon as he got here 2 hours ago. I had got so uneasy I couldn't sit still. I had to do something with my hand, so I took up a needle off the table and I went to threading it. My hand shook, and I was making a bad job of it. When the woman stopped talking, I looked up. She was looking at me pretty curious, smiling a little. Well, I put down the needle and thread and let on to be interested, and I was too, and says, $300 is a power of money. I wish my mother could get it. Is your husband going over there tonight? Oh, yes. He went up with the man I was telling you of to get to a boat to see if they could borrow another gun, and they'll go over there after midnight. Okay. Huck is here in town talking to this lady down the river, and Jim is still sitting back on the island. So this uneasiness that Huck is feeling, well, we can understand that by now. Well, couldn't they see it better if they was to wait till daytime? Yes, and couldn't the see better too? After midnight, he'll likely be asleep, and they can slip around in the woods and hunt up his campfire, better for dark, if he's got one. I didn't think of that. The woman kept looking at me pretty curious, and I didn't feel a bit comfortable. Pretty soon she says, "What did you say your name was, honey?" Mary Williams. Somehow it didn't seem to me that I said I was Mary before, so I didn't look up. Seemed to me I said I was Sarah, so I felt sort of cornered, and I feared that maybe I was looking it too. I wish the women would say something more. The longer she sat still, the uneasier I was. But now she says, "Honey, I thought you said it was Sarah when you first come in." "Oh, yes'm, I did. Sarah Mary Williams. Sarah's my first name. Some calls me Sarah, some calls me Mary." "Oh, that's the way of it?" "Yes'm." I was feeling better then, but I wished I was out of there anyway. I couldn't look up yet. Well, the woman fell to talking about how hard times was, and how poor they had to live, and how the rats was as free as if they owned the place, and so forth and so on, and then I got easy again. She was right about the rats. You'd see one stick his nose out of a hole in the corner every little while. She said she had to have things handy to throw at them when she was alone, or they wouldn't give her no peace. She showed me a bar of lead, twisted up into a knot, and said she was a good shot with one generally, but she'd wrenched her arm a day or two ago and didn't know whether she could throw true now. But she watched for a chance, and directly she banged away at a rat, but she missed him wide, and said, "Ouch! It hurt her arm so." Then she told me to try for the next one. Well, I wanted to be getting away before the old man got back, but of course I didn't let on. I got the thing, and the first rat that showed his nose I let drive, and if he'd stayed where he was, he'd been a tolerable sick rat. She said that was first rate, and she reckoned I would have the next one. She went and got a lump of lead and fetched it back and brought along a hank of yarn, which she wanted me to help her with. I held up two hands, and she spun the hank over them and went on talking about her husband's matters. She broke off to say, "Keep your eye on the rats. You better have the lead in your lap, handy." So she dropped the lump into my lap, just at that moment, and I clapped my legs together on it, and she went on talking. But only about a minute. Then she took off the hank, and she looked me straight in the face, but very pleasant, says, "Come now, what's your real name?" What, Mom? "What's your real name? Is it Bill, a Tom, a Bob? Or what is it? I reckon I shook like a leaf, and I didn't know hardly what to do. But I says, please don't poke fun at a poor little girl like me, Mum. If I'm in the way here, I'll... Oh, no, you won't. Sit down and stay here where you are. I ain't going to hurt you, and I ain't going to tell you nothing. You just tell me your secret and trust me. I'll keep it. And what's more, I'll help you. So my old man, if you want him to. You see, you're a runaway prentice. That's all. That ain't anything. There ain't any harm in it. You've been treated bad, and you made up your mind to cut. Bless you, child. I wouldn't tell on you. Now tell about it now. That's a good boy. Now I'm going to stop here, and we're going to talk a little bit about this lady. She's found out that Huck is, of course, not a little girl. And she's given him some tests, hasn't she? What are some of the things that she did to see if she could tell whether or not he was a boy or a girl? Think on that. Look back at the text. She seems to have, of course, given him the question of what's your real name to kind of get him tripped up there. But there are some other tests. She's going to tell us more about that here in just a moment. Well, is Huck going to open up and tell her the truth? We shall see. So I said it wouldn't be no use to try to play it any longer, and I would just make a clean breast and tell her everything, but she mustn't go back on her promise. Then I told her that my father and mother was dead, and that the law had bound me to a mean old farmer in the country 30 miles back from the river, and he treated me so bad, and I couldn't stand it no longer. He went away to be gone a couple of days, so I cleared out, and had been there 3 nights coming in 30 miles. I traveled nights and hid daytimes and slept, and the bag of bread and meat I carried from home lasted me all the way until I had plenty. I said I believed my Uncle Adam Moore would take good care of me, and so that was why I struck out for his town of Goshen. Goshen, child? Well, this ain't Goshen. This is St. Petersburg. Goshen's 10 miles further up the river. Who told you this was Goshen? Why, a man I met at daybreak this morning, just as I was going to turn to the woods for my regular sleep. He told me when the roads forked I must take the right hand, and 5 miles would fetch me to Goshen. He was drunk, I reckon. He told you just exactly wrong. Well, he did act like he was drunk, but it ain't got no matter now. I gotta be moving along. I'll fetch Goshen before daylight. Hold on a minute. I'll put you up a snack to eat. You might want it. So she put me up a snack and says, say, when the cow's laying down, which of it gets up first? Answer it prompt now. Don't stop to study over it. Which gets up first? The hind end, Mum. Well, then a horse? The forward end, Mum. Which side of a tree does the most moss grow on? North side. If 15 cows is browsing on a hillside, how many of them eats with their heads pointing the same direction? The whole 15, Mum. Well, I reckon you have lived in the country. I thought maybe you was trying to hocus me again. What's your real name now? George Peters, Mum. So Huck has yet again found himself in a lie, but this time he was able to manage to show, one, that he was a boy, given a fake name yet again, George, and he's also been able to prove that he's a country boy, which we know to be true. Let's see how this carries forward. Well, try to remember it, George. Don't forget and tell me that it's Alexander before you go, and then go on saying it's George Alexander when I catch you. And don't go about women in that old calico. You do a girl tolerable poor, but you might fool men, maybe. Bless you, child, when you set out to thread a needle and hold that thread still and fetch the needle up to it, hold the needle and still poke the thread at it. That's the way a woman almost always does it, but a man always does it t'other way. And when you throw at a rat or anything, hit yourself up tiptoe and fetch your hand up over your head as awkward as you can and miss your rat about 6 or 7 foot. Throw stiff arm from the shoulder, like there was a pivot there for it to turn on, like a girl. Not from the wrist and elbow with your arm out to one side like a boy. And mind you, when a girl tries to catch anything in her lap, she throws her knees apart. You don't clap them together the way you did when you catch the lump of lead. Why, I spotted you for a boy when you was threading the needle, and I contrived the other things just to make certain. Now, you trot along to your uncle, Sarah Mary Williams George Alexander Peters, and if you get into trouble, and send word for you send word for Miss Judith Loftus, which is me, and I'll do what I can to get you out of it. Keep the river road all the way, and the next time you tramp, take shoes and socks with you. The river road's a rocky one, and your feet will be needing conditions where you get to Goshen, I reckon. Well, I went up the bank about 50 yards, and then I doubled my tracks, and I slipped back to where my canoe was, a good piece below the house. I jumped off and was off in a hurry. I went upstream far enough to make the head of the island, and then I started across. I took off the sunbonnet, for I didn't want no blinders on then. When I was about the middle, I hear the clock begin to strike, so I stops and listens. The sound come faint over the water, but clear. 11. When I struck out the head of the island, I never waited to blow, though I was most winded. I shoved right in the timber where my old camp used to be, and I started a good fire there in a high, dry spot. Then I jumped to the canoe and dug out for a place a mile and a half below, as hard as I could go. I landed and stopped through the timber and up the ridge into the cavern. There Jim laid, sound asleep on the ground. I roused him up and said, Get up and hump yourself, Jim. There ain't a minute to lose. They're after us. Jim never asked no questions. He never said a word. But the way he worked for the next half an hour showed just how he was scared. By that time, everything we had in the world was on our raft, and we was ready to be shoved out the willow cove where she was hid. We put out the campfire in the cavern the next thing, and didn't show a candle outside after that. I took the canoe out from the shore a little piece and took a look, but if there was a boat around, I couldn't see it, for stars and shadows ain't good to see by. Then we got out the raft and slipped along down the shade, past the foot of the island, dead still, never saying a word. There are a couple of things for us to consider before we move on to the next chapter. First, I want you to consider how Huck is referred to him and Jim yet again as us. Now, he's just gone into town, and we know that they're after Jim and Pat, but he says us, referring to himself as well. Consider what implications that might take. We've talked about how Huck might have put himself in additional danger by continuing to keep this friendship with Jim and continuing to trot along the island with him. But he refers, again, affectionately to his friend Jim and himself as us. They get themselves in the canoe to kind of set off, but before then, Huck has set off a fire in a different spot in the island. Well, why do you suppose that might be? What are we expecting to happen? And then this character, who he spent a great deal of time talking to earlier in the chapter, Miss Judith, she says she's promised to help him should he come across any other trouble. Do you think we'll see her again? Keep your thoughts open. This time, guys, please make sure you make your way over to slide 44 to be able to answer your text analysis questions. You've got 2 to choose from. You can answer both or at least 1. Now, I've provided you here with a text analysis sample response from the previous chapters to help you along if you feel like you're struggling with how this text analysis should look. I've got my answer in my opinion. I've got text evidence, which in this case you'll see I didn't use a direct quote, but I did refer back to the characters in the plot. And then my analysis section, which shows, hey, I found this piece of text evidence. This is what I think it means. That's analysis, guys. In the meantime, I hope you all have enjoyed reading Chapter 11. You can start preparing your predictions for Chapter 12, and I'll see you tomorrow.